G'day legends and happy Sunday. I hope that you have had a fantastic weekend and I hope that this week is gearing up to be a great working week. Now if you see that I look a little bit tired, well, I have been working massive days and I'll continue working big days because of course what we are seeing is massive escalation and movements that can really change the world from here. There are some major players involved in what is happening around the world. So today, as we did yesterday, we're going to have really two parts of this video. The first part, we're going to be talking about Iran and Israel. Now, in that, I'll go over what has transpired over the past 24 hours. Look at strikes, look at any changes, talk about some official comments. But I want to go over something I touched on the day before this happened, is we touched on the penetrators, the bunker busters. How much effect can these really actually have on some of these Iranian nuclear facilities? Look at least the open source information that we know. Look at then Israel today being quoted saying that we need some US involvement as well, and see, well, what happens if that comes? What happens if that doesn't come? And this is the thing about when you launch a war like this, is now that it's launched, you need to win, and that Israel, they need to win, and Iran, they don't need to win. The regime just needs to survive to then have a victory, if that makes sense. And unless all those nuclear facilities are then ripped apart, blown apart, diffused, well, we know the first weapon that they are going to try and make following whenever this falls silent. So we'll go over all of that, just double check unless I've missed anything yet. We'll go over oil prices and some more information as well on the Iranian missiles that we are seeing. And then of course we're going to talk about Ukraine. We'll look at maps, we'll compare maps, we'll look at geolocations and a little bit of footage. So this video may be a little bit long, but there's a lot coming. Now, of course, we have seen multiple strikes. We saw strikes from Israel into Iran, although we did see a noticeable decrease in those strikes. Now, is this that we'll see less? No, it's probably just a bit of a lull. We will see a lot more strikes coming. We are hearing a lot of Israeli officials saying that this is only the start and it's going to get worse from here. We heard Trump say very similar. So let's look at some of the strikes in Tehran. Now, as you know, I'm not super interested in just looking at things go bang. I'm interested in the strategical tactical effect of that. If you want to go and look at all the videos, just jump on Twitter, jump on Telegram, have a look. But remember, propaganda machines on both sides are in absolute full force. So just really use your head and go, does that seem legitimate? Okay, I've heard 3 F-35s have gone down, but there's not a single video of it. Well, you know, the ghost of Tehran is in the sky somewhere. But what we have seen is a lot of the Israeli strikes are now targeting economic positions on Iran. We see this is in Tehran. This is a fuel depot here with millions of litres of petrol now, I should say fuel on fire here. And then we see oil depots like this on fire as well. And this is very significant. This does really impact not only domestic economy, but international global economies as well, because Iran is a massive oil exporter, and we'll look at who is buying that oil and who has interest in maintaining the supply of that also. Now, in Tehran, we saw then this as well, and this was something I found very interesting. Now, this can be one of two things. Let's look at the footage first. Just look at about here. You'll see what appears to be a missile go up and come back down. Short range right there. Now, this can be two things, okay? It could be air defense then failing. It could just be a dud rocket failing, and we've seen that many times. But what more people are saying that it is that this is then active Israeli intelligence operators working inside of Tehran, like we saw on day one, with short-range spike or other systems striking air defense or then other targets. So it could be that was captured as well. Now, of course, what we've seen is a lot of strikes going back the other way, of Iranian strikes coming into Israel. And we see in Haifa, there's a massive port in Haifa. Of course, this comes with fuel sources. There's energy plants here. And we saw multiple then Iranian missiles fired at Haifa port with multiple of them getting through as well. Yes, by the footage we have, the vast majority are intercepted. We'll go about that in a second because that's something I'm going to be keeping a tally on, well, at least as well as I can be, because that's going to tell us a lot. And we see footage like this. Now, I want to show you this footage because you'll get an idea in a second of what I'm talking about. We can see these missiles here. These are Iranian missiles coming in. We see some of them intercepted, and then we see then the shockwave of one of these. This is straight into Tel Aviv, into the capital of Israel. Massive explosion hitting all sorts of areas. Residential, there's been a university hit, a whole bunch. And I want to show you again this part here. It gives you just an idea of the amount of interceptions, but still that some of these are getting through. Now, using Israeli figures as well as our own observation, I believe that about 10% of Iranian missiles are getting past the Israeli air defenses. So we saw in that third wave of attacks today, we were live streaming at the time, that there was 6 confirmed missiles then strike of what was said to be 50 to 55. So I'm just going to go rough around 10%. Now, as this air campaign continues, this is something that I will be monitoring because we will see, of course, air defense degrade and likely that success rate start climbing. And there is massive degradation of the Iranian air defense. Israel has air superiority, well, it seems like has almost all the way to air superiority over Iran at this point in time from what we are seeing, although it does appear the air defense is more active today than it has been in the previous days as well, which is very interesting to see. But it will be interesting to see if Iran can keep this pressure. Will we start seeing that success rate of what gets through actually climb? That could be interesting to see. Now, I want to clear up a couple of things and go through little bits and pieces too. So we see this, and this is interceptions outside or in the atmosphere. Now, this is from a contact, and I thought this was interesting here. So let's just go through it. You can tell me what you think of this. The background on these Shabeb missiles Iran has are essentially an upscaled North Korean missiles, which in turn were just scaled up from tactical ballistic missiles the Soviets had in the 70s, the famous Scud series of missiles, which I'm sure you've heard before. The Scud had very short range, as you know. These have been scaled so they can get 600 to 700 miles out of them. The thing is about these old Shababs is they were designed really just to hit Iraq, so much shorter range. They don't have or didn't have the range to hit Tel Aviv unless they are launched from very close to the Iran-Iraq border, which is, of course, very dangerous for the Iranians manning the launches. And we've seen a lot of those launches already taken out. So the Iranians, they take out the explosives warheads to get longer range. They also likely put back a little bit of concrete as ballast because the centre of mass must be higher than the aerodynamic centre to maintain stability. Think of an arrow-heavy bit and the front fins in the back. So these Shabeb missiles were not in any way designed by the Russians to operate like this, and especially not at these absurd ranges and velocities approaching Mach 10 on re-entry. So not as we see on the ground, that's re-entry very, very high. And absolutely not without the proper weight warhead, which is why he's saying we're seeing a lot of failures of these. What you are seeing when you see this is debris tumbling out of the atmosphere is just that the missiles themselves are going out of control on their own. So a lot of what we're seeing then re-entering and coming into areas like Tel Aviv or Haifa is actually the missile itself, the debris, then out of control and hitting then wherever that goes from there. But we're also seeing these strikes then very high up in the atmosphere. Now, what he says is Iran uses these missiles to deplete the Israeli Defense Forces' air defense munitions and are probably as publicly a cope on the home front. So saying, look how many we are firing out. And the IDF has every reason to tell you they are real missiles, of course, that we're shooting down 96%. Both sides have incentive, an informational war. Now Iran has some very capable, very modern missiles that are highly accurate, but these are very expensive and they cost a lot, and there aren't many. They can't shoot down with any regularity at all. So saying that some of these, they're more advanced hypersonic sort of style, there's not many of them, but they are very, very difficult to hit. For instance, look at like the Russian Iskander and the difficulty of intercepting these. But when you see a spectacular hit, like one of these where you see that big plume, that's what you are seeing, is the very modern ballistic missiles they have. This is the only pictures that will tell you there's been a proper interception. So what he is saying, in short, the TLDR, is a lot of what we're seeing tumbling and coming through is more just these Franken scuds, I'll call them, with a bit of concrete as ballast in them, firing across, breaking up in the atmosphere, and a lot of the time themselves failing, while some of the more high-end ones, these are very high up in the atmosphere, and these are being intercepted by some very, very high-tech interceptors, of which there's not many in the world, and there's not that many actually being produced either. And a friend said to me today, he said, you'll like this quote that I saw, that technological superiority, it drops to zero when your magazine is empty. And this is the whole bit about quantity and quality and that maintaining pressure through war. So let's talk about this. I've seen this being quoted everywhere. What many pages are saying that Pakistan has said is if there's any nuclear attack on Iran, we will also launch a nuclear attack on Israel. Now, I can't find where anyone in Pakistan who is an official has said that. Now, what Pakistan has said is they vowed to stand behind Iran, that Israel has targeted Iran, Yemen, Palestine. If Muslim nations don't unite now, each will face the same fate. And I'm very surprised at how the Muslim nations are not united at all. They said, the defense minister, we stand behind Iran and will support them at every international forum to protect their interests. It's a brazen violation of Iran's sovereignty. Pakistan stands in solidarity with the government and the people of Iran, but very different to what is being said down in here. We have seen, of course, Pakistan come off the back of that small skirmish that occurred that had every opportunity to absolutely get out of control with India. Now, let's talk a little bit about oil. As we've said, that Israel has been continuing to strike Iranian economic targets. Now, this Karg Island, or this oil terminal, it's the largest oil export terminal in Iran, and I will not be surprised to see this struck. With this too, yes, it has economic effect, but it absolutely has environmental disaster written all over it as well. And we may see Iran as well further try and influence global markets of oil by the Strait of Hormuz or the strikes in other countries as well. But let's talk a little bit about oil. Now, the markets are not open, although they are set to increase. Some are suggesting up to $120 per barrel. Now, some are saying lower. I've put in my bets at about $85 a barrel. Now, the reason some of this is important, we'll link this to Ukraine in a second, is, well, Russia's fiscal economy, that their budget is based on an average price, not of Brent, of Urals crude, of was $69.70 a barrel. I believe now it's $58. So if this goes 74, it's going to be about $62 for Urals crude. So then Russia's going to be above their average yearly budget for oil. So that is increasing there. And of course, we may see this skyrocket. And of course, that has huge effect through to economies that are purchasing oil, not selling oil. But what about Iranian oil? Well, China is a major importer of Iranian oil. They import, through March at least, 1.91 million of barrels of oil per day from Iran. And if we take quick maths at $74 a barrel, that's $140 plus million a day, which is $52 billion annually. And we have seen some of the comments that China has made about then these strikes as well, and will want to maintain where they can get their cheap energy sources like oil from. So we're not going to see, China fully step into something like this, but we could see more support, even political support as well. Now, Trump has said this. Putin called me this morning to very nicely wish me a happy birthday, but more importantly, talk about Iran, a country he knows very well. We talked at length. Much less time was spent talking about Russia-Ukraine, but that will be for next week. He is doing the planned prisoner swaps. Large numbers of prisoners are being exchanged immediately from both sides, as well as a number of bodies. The call lasted approximately 1 hour. He feels, as do I, this war in Israel-Iran should end, to which I explained his war should also end. So calling then it his war, which of course a lot of the time we see Trump say things like Biden's war, and as well that this should end, and Trump wanting further ultimatums on this. But it'll be very, very difficult to actually end this now that it has started. As I've said, walking up to the edge is much, much easier than walking back from it. We did see before all this kicked off that Putin did say he's willing to work with the US to help Iran dispose of some of their nuclear material. But this is the bit that I'm very interested in today. Is this article here from Axios, that Israel urges the US to join war with Iran to eliminate nuclear program. Now, with all of these, take it with a grain of salt, but this is still an interesting point to talk on, and I'll show you some tables in a second. Israel has asked Trump administration over the past 48 hours to join the war with Iran in order to eliminate its nuclear program, according to two Israeli officials. The big picture. Israel lacks the bunker buster bombs and large bomber aircraft needed to destroy Iran's Fordow uranium enrichment site, which is built into a mountain and is deep underground. The Trump administration has so far distanced itself from Israel's operation and argued that it would be illegitimate for Iran to retaliate by striking US targets, saying, we're not involved directly in this, so don't strike our targets. But a lot of this, you may see false flags to then have US strike some of those targets. Iran wouldn't be surprised if they strike US targets because they and the rest of the world do see America as directly involved in this. Directly attacking Iran, even if the US involvement is limited to bombing a single site, would pull the US directly into the war. However, Fordow remains operational after the operation ends. Israel will have failed in its goal to eliminate Iran's nuclear program. So after this operation ends, if these are still operational, it is a failure in that. And that is why I've said Israel, now that they've started, they have to win. And if Iran can hold on, then that is a victory in itself, as long as they survive. Now, a White House official denied that on Friday, a second US official confirmed on Saturday that Israel has urged the Trump administration to join the war, but said currently the administration is not considering it. So they're saying we're not going to join the war, but some are saying it's very flip-floppy in this. Remember, the current US administration, they said they didn't know about these attacks, and then they said, well, we did know about them, so, where have I gone? A senior official said the fastest way for Iran to accomplish peace is to give up its nuclear weapons program. That was through the discussions, but Iran, they didn't want to do this. What they are saying is the entire operation really has to be completed with the elimination of Fordow, Israeli ambassador to US. Israeli officials have raised the idea of US participation to take this out with US. Israeli source said the US is considering request and stressed Israel hopes Trump agrees. But this is an issue. If you can't see issues in this, if alarm bells aren't going off, well, this is one of the problems. As I said, if Israel do not then succeed in their strikes, they've given further incentive for Iran to develop and potentially use nuclear weapons. And as we'll show you in these studies and previous ones, that they alone have said that they can't bust into some of these with munitions without the US. So if this is saying we need the US to get into these to destroy them, but the US isn't on board yet, well, a war has been launched that cannot be won, if you will, without US involvement to bust into those bunkers. I think a lot of what Israel's plan is to decapitate Iran and put it into such political turmoil that there is an overthrow internally if they can't break into these nuclear areas. If Israel, as from what I've seen, at least open source, Israel does not have the munitions to get into these, so they've launched a war to then destroy these nuclear facilities, of which they are relying on the US to actually be able to go into it. What if the US says no? What happens then? Because if Iran survive, we know the first weapon of which they'll be looking to make. So let's talk about this. Why have I said this, and why have I said that this is an issue? And this was before any of this happened as well. So we look at the Iranian underground enrichment and production facilities, and then we'll look at where the massive ordnance penetrator and how deep they can go. So we look at some of the depth of these facilities. We look at Natanz fuel enrichment plant, the one of which we do know that, or at least there's claims that it does have some level of alpha radiation presence within the facility. We're talking 12 meters of reinforced concrete, 22 metres of earth, nowhere near as deep as Fordo, which they're talking 80 to 90 metres underground, and some of these new facilities, which they're saying 80 to 100 metres underground, or likely deeper. So these are very, very deep. And as we saw back in this article, that they'd need US to break into these facilities. Now, well, there's munitions that can go deep, but these aren't available to Israel either. So we see the massive ordnance penetrator, these dropped by B-2 Spirit bombers, B-52s, things like that. Yes, these are 60 metres. Israel doesn't have the GBU-57 nor the aircraft to drop them. We're looking more at these sort of systems here. GBU-28-72s can be dropped by F-15, F-16, but these have nowhere near the penetration capability of these much, much larger systems. And we looked over these as well, that a lot of these sites are located 8 metres underground. The covering is predominantly reinforced concrete and hard rock. All the weapons available to the Israeli Air Force, except for the GBU-57, which they don't have available, they've got the 72, they will require several impacts on the same crater to burrow down. But some of these are estimated 80 to 100 metres with reinforced concrete. You'd need multiple of the 5.7 dropped by the American bombers only. And it will, yes, the strikes with lesser penetrating weapons could still collapse entry and exit points given good intelligence about their exact layout, but unless a longer-term campaign were mounted with regular follow-up strikes, efforts to dig down to facilities and re-establish access and supplies would likely to begin almost immediately. And you've heard me talking about this excavation of these areas, that a lot of the entry and exit tunnels have probably been taken down, but they will almost immediately start excavating that back out. And a lot of these facilities, like Fordo, are probably mostly intact, except for entry and exits. Now, this is continuing on that article from back in March 25 that went over that the destruction of the program by military means is not feasible, and limited strikes carry significant escalatory risks. That to the Israeli attacks on Iraq's reactor and Syria back in 81 and 07, that this isn't good to compare because they were reliant on outside expertise, where Iran has a very large internal nuclear knowledge base too. That's why I've seen a lot of strikes on several nuclear scientists as well. They relied on foreign assistance, but they've got the indigenous expertise. So while destruction of Iran's nuclear program is not feasible, and even limited strikes carry significant escalatory risks. Should Iran's nuclear programs reach a stage where it poses threat beyond what is acceptable, for instance, if intelligence was obtained on an Iranian decision to rush towards a nuclear weapon, even if Tehran decided to begin uranium enrichment to 90%, military attacks could be used to set the program back to a more acceptable state and be assessed as being worth the escalatory risks, making clear the willingness to carry out such attacks, but only as an option of last resort due to how risky this is. But again, what this is doing is that this is only delaying, and now that there's been kinetic action against this, they'll have incentive to speed that up. It's delaying, but Israel, they've stated their goal is to completely dismantle any nuclear, and US at any Iranian nuclear facilities. And I don't see, given these numbers and whatever, that Israel can do that without US involvement. So the question would be how to bring in the US. And about Iran, the current regime, they do not have to win. They just have to survive. And then a lot of these, some may then remain then operable after excavation of entry and exit points. So this is where it is so difficult, especially a war like this that may likely, most likely will not have follow-on ground operation, that it has to be fully dismantled. And if it's not, big problems. Now, let's talk then about concrete. And this Patricia Murrins, she's a writer for Defence Arabia. I just want to focus on the concrete in this. Since the 80s, Iran has been using UHPC, ultra-high performance concrete, in its construction of nuclear facilities and missile depots, especially projected under rock mountains. So you've got rock mountains and then this further under here. Now, this speaks about the GBU-57 of what it can go in concrete or soil compared to UHPC. This mandate brief here, this is the source for that, but I can't find any other sources, so just take that with a massive grain of salt at this point in time. I just want to focus on that concrete for a little bit and this bit. Obviously, if I'm suggesting the Israelis, they knew it would be impossible to completely eliminate the program. Therefore, I dare say the objective of the attack was to humiliate Iran and diminish its military capabilities, delaying its military and economic development. So delaying so they don't develop this, so delay it and delay it and delay it once it gets to a point. Also, enough internal unrest that may be internal overthrow, or bring in then the US that could potentially, from larger bombers, drop systems like this. So is Iran one of the leaders in this ultra-high performance concrete? Well, from Popular Mechanics back in 2022, they have this article, Between Bunker Buster Bombs and High-Tech Concrete, and they speak about this. In late 2000s, rumours circulated about bunker in Iran struck by a bunker buster bomb. The bomb had failed to penetrate and remained embedded in the surface of the bunker, presumably until the occupants called in a bomb disposal team. Rather than smashing through the concrete, the bomb had been unexpectedly stopped dead. The reason was not hard to guess. Iran was a leader in the new technology of UHPC. Evidently, their latest was too much for standard bunker busters. In this article, they also say that China is one of the leaders in this field as well. No surprise, China is making massive underground complexes that we see. It's like that one that was like 5x pentagons that's just under layers of concrete. So huge problem for a lot of these systems. And like this one from Axios here, that for the Fadao center, it's going, the entire operation, which really has to be completed with the elimination of Fadao. And that's the problem, is can Fadao be taken out with anything in Israel's arsenal? It was their reliance on America being directly involved. And what would it take to have America directly involved or not? How involved is America? How involved will they become? How involved will Russia and China be, who have, of course, relationships with Iran? Okay, so let's have a look over the maps. Of course, here is Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, the first place I want to come is down into Velika Novosilka, where we see two updates. So you see out through Komar, in this direction, just a small spire of Russian control out here, when we saw, of course, those flags go up in here. Now, what I say again and again is, given the nature of this war, it's probably grinding forward and using this waterway as then an axis to leverage off as natural barrier. So it's probably more like the maps we see, but we can see this does show advancement then yesterday and then further today filling up. So from where we spoke last to then yesterday, and then to where we are seeing today as Odrane, Bahatar still not shown under control, sure, Oleksivkia, but no grey zone out into these regions where we know there was geolocations as well, but in the direction of Zaporizhia. So I wouldn't be surprised if this whole area in here ends up coming under control. And I believe that from Velika Novosilka all the way up to Komar is under control. Now, someone did point out and go, Willie, I didn't really notice that, but if you go from Velika Novosilka to where it is in Komar, it's 16.5 kilometres. That's 10 miles. That is a large advancement considering the grinding nature of this warfare. So let's have a look on a few of the maps, and then we'll talk about Pokrovsk. So I believe just the nature of the warfare, you'd expect it to look more like this rather than just single prongs out. Now, this is that windy road we have right here, is right in here. And the the northern and western extremes are shown as the same, or very similar to the same. It just doesn't show the kilometre squares filling in between this. And as it is a traditional grinding war, not manoeuvre, you'd think it would be moving like this. But of course, this shows massively different because it shows this is the road through Oleksivkia, Zeleny Hut, up to these areas as well. So it's showing all of this is under control still. This back in here as in grey zone, but that Oleksivka, Zeleny Hut, a lot of these areas coming under control, and northern part of Velika Novosilka. Now, what of course this is becoming is it is joining up with the axes on the Pokrovsk West, which is, as we discussed yesterday, there is a number of areas that are now meeting, and these tactical axes will then turn into large strategic kilometre squares gains. So let's have a look on this. So Deep State map, they have said in the direction of Kotlyrivka that Ukraine did take back some ground in the blue here around from Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Now, adamant that Russians aren't in Dnipropetrovsk. We can see why for informational losses too. But it's shown that this grey has then turned blue. So they said there's back under Ukrainian control. So grey is contested, blue is under their control, and then just slight grey zone movement in there today. So we can have a look on the Syriac map, and he shows a different story in here. So let's then line this up. And of course, we have areas like Odashne as well. And then just up into here, he is saying that the Russians are up to the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast here, and in this direction, just out of Horokove or in between Kharkiv and Horokove, that there is movement up to there as well. But did say that the Ukrainian army managed to recapture some positions inside Zadazove, which is back up in here. But this shows that Peshane is coming under Russian control. So a lot of small movements on here, not replicated across the maps, but it'll take a lot before there is actual acceptance of Russia inside Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Optics is very, very important for Ukraine. Now, let's move up while we're on today's map, and then we'll move and have a look on yesterday. So we come into then the Siversk front. Geolocation was right out in this area yesterday, but we can see out of Bilohorivka, this is showing that there was some Russian movement in this direction, which we can now confirm that there was Russian movement west in this direction. So let's have a look at Siversk. So again, this is showing far more. It's showing right out in here through remaining areas, capturing Hirovkia too. Given the geolocation we've seen, that appears to be more likely than is showing. Of course, moving in the direction of Siversk. Now, what we're going to do is turn this off. We're going to go back then to yesterday, turn this back on, and have a look at things moving. So, of course, then we come into the Pokrovsk eastern sector. And I think I accidentally deleted this map, but no, we have it back. So we have Pokrovsk, the eastern sector here, and a large amount of ground being made to the north of Malinivka. If we measure this from here to here, some 2 kilometers by, I can't do that anymore. You used to be able to just click and move it by some 5 kilometers. So that is significant areas. And we're on the 15th today, and we are more than half through the kilometres of last month. So likely we will see a larger month again of kilometre squares. We can confirm this movement up to this Koptevi as well. This is only shown as grey zone. Syriac show that there is Russian control up to that area, and then further movement to the north of Romanivka. We can see Romanivka is right here. Further movement on then the western flank of Toretsk. Now, let's move our way up into then the northeast. Now, we showed you those map updates. I want to come up into the northeast, Kupiansk sector. Now, I've spoken about there is some concern in here because the Oskil River splits Kupiansk in two, and that this pocket is split by that river, which is difficult. It's going to be difficult once this starts squeezing, not only to bring forces over, but to retreat forces back if you need. And this is something today that I saw that I wanted to show you. So down here near Sadove, which is Sadove, right in here, there's a pontoon bridge set up to cross, of course, Ukrainian items this way. And we have seen that Russian munitions have then targeted this area. You can see that bridge here then being targeted. Of course, bridges like this can be fixed relatively quickly, but again, it does present a huge problem of that waterway in there. Now, while we're on footage, let's talk about this. And as I may have misspoken yesterday, but it's still not exactly known. We have more footage of that Su-25 Frogfoot going down. Now, what many are saying is, no, it wasn't actually his wingman that shot him down. What it was an airframe failure. So it may have been an airframe failure. These are older aircraft, they've flown a hell of a lot of sorties. But, you know, there is something else which every time I see close air support jets like this I think about, is it also could be hitting something in the air. We've seen that footage of that Su-25 missing a drone by only a foot. It could easily have hit, like a drone hit the wing, and then you have a massive airframe. You think hitting a bird is bad. Imagine hitting a bloody Baba Yaga drone or something in the air. Now, I'm not saying that's what it was. It's either, you know, it's most likely either it's been hit by a friendly missile or has had an airframe failure, but it is one of those things for the battle space that needs to be taken into account, is drones working in the same environment that don't have any sort of ATC of choppers and planes, and the challenges that that further presents. Now let's move right up into the north, and we have then Sumy, where Russia has been able to increase further its offensive into Sumy. We had some Ukrainian counteroffensives in here, but they look to have died out. Let's have a look in Sumy. So focusing in these areas down here, which is not even shown as grey zone on this map. So right down out of Lochnia from the border, heading then southwest as well through Yanakivka. And does he say that they captured the remainder of Yanakivka? They controlled just the centre, not the remainder. So further an exploiting area down here, as well as where Ukraine did cross the border in near Kuevo, that they did pull back out of here. Again, they withdrew from there. I have one geolocation in Yamblanivka that many pages are saying Yamblanivka has come under Russian control. So right in the center, I got this as close as I can. It's right on the U. It's right in here. We then see this footage here of a Russian flag going up right there. And that is the geolocation. So a lot happening around the world. Remember, one of the big things I like to preach is just for people to keep their humanity. I see again and again and again that we go onto a Russian page and people are laughing at casualties of Ukrainians. You see that on a Ukrainian page laughing at Russian casualties. You go onto an Iranian page showing missiles hitting the center of Tel Aviv and the same, and the Israeli the same. And at the end of the day, civilians are civilians, and we still need to have an equality of compassion regardless of the regimes, even of the militaries, but of just civilians themselves and how these people get caught up in this. That we can't have a hierarchy of human suffering and an inequality of compassion. Anyway, legends, I hope that you have a fantastic day. I am going to get some rest and finish up the editing on this. So look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Someone said to leave a break at the end, so like the video. So I guess like the video. Okay, see ya, boys.